And in the middle of the appointment, the rabbi was blabbering away to him. He didn't know, he wanted his support for something. And then all of a sudden he says, "Oh, excuse me," took over. He says, "What happened? What now?" He says, "I have to daven mincha." So the rabbi got up and he took out his little black cord, his gartel, put it on, and all of a sudden he goes in the corner and he starts davening mincha. Just the smallest of prayers. And he's sitting there, he's now a nervous wreck, this scientist. He says, "What am I supposed to do? He made a synagogue here. Am I allowed to do it? Is it a violation of something if I do this?" And he's not a shul man and not observant and nothing. And he came home that night. He said, "You're never going to believe what happened. I gave a rabbi an appointment. He wanted my support. I told him no. But I tell you, I never met a person like this. There's such personal belief and such commitment. He's waiting for this appointment for 6 months. And then he has a higher calling. He has to daven mincha in the middle, and he's davening mincha in my office." And anyways, he ultimately became very close with this rabbi, very close with other rabbis. He ultimately became an observant Jew. And he said the hardest thing for him, when he first became about tshuva, because he did a lot of travel as his work as scientist in NASA, was that he had to, in Chicago O'Hare Airport, which is one of the biggest, today I think it's the second biggest airport in the United States, or the biggest I think is in Atlanta, but I really don't know. Once upon a time O'Hare was the biggest there. He said, I would always chap a nash, and they had these hot dog stands, and I would chap a hot dog. And then once I became kosher to the level that once I became committed that I'm going to start keeping kosher, all of a sudden I would walk by a hot dog stand and I would feel a tremendous, ooh, that hot dog. And then he said, "What, am I nuts or something? I mean, I'm going crazy for a hot dog now. I can't control myself for a..." So life is a struggle, and life is development, and people who live life are constantly growing. People who stagnate. I have a good friend in Ottawa, and he says, he's in his 90s, and he says, "Never become old. Become older. You become old, means you stop. Older is a process.
There's future.
It's older. Older. My father-in-law, my wife's father, when he was in his 90s, he was a true, he epitomized the chassid. He was happy, he was b'simcha. He managed to interpret everything for good. He survived the war. He came to... Anyways, he had, thank God, a very unique life. And he came here, he would talk to people in his 90s about making donations to the yeshiva in Montreal and talk to them about the long-term plans, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, as if he was going to be around. I mean, he made it till 94, but which is nice. And I had somebody in shul by us, I davened in the Chabad at the center point. Had Yortzeit for his father, and then his father died at 102. So certain people, have enormous longevity. But when you have meaning in your life, and every person can have meaning if they recognize they have a spirit. If they recognize that, if life is only my body, well, let me tell you, as the older you get, even Pierre Trudeau recognized that you can't always ski down the slopes like when you were 30 years old. So, if your existence is your body, then the older you get, it starts getting very, very frightening. Not that you're walking around in absolute fear, but what do you have to look forward to? But if a person lives with a spirit, he recognizes he has a neshama. He recognizes in depth, in truth, in sincerity, his neshama is the essence of his life. Then once you recognize you're a neshama, and once you recognize God, rather, once you come to an understanding that you have a relationship with God, that you're here in this world for a unique purpose that nobody else can repeat. There's no duplicate. God didn't use a photocopy machine. Kishem she'ein partsufeim shavim, just like faces aren't equal, so also ein deoseim shavim. No minds are equal, no perspectives are equal. And that's one of the beauties about the mitzvahs. We have the same code of mitzvahs, but everybody does it different. It means you follow the rules, but everybody invests in a piece of themselves and what they do, and that makes it unique. My putting on tefillin and your putting on tefillin are not the same. Even though on one hand, We're all the same. And on the other hand, we're dramatically different because my investment of my spirit, of my mind, of my kavanah, of my intention, of my feelings is not the same as your feelings. So we have an amazing gift that we give. We can say truly, Ashreinu matoi cholkeinu. Thank you, Almighty, for our lot in life, that we have an awareness that there is a God. And anybody in this room has an awareness, whether they are a believer presently or not a believer, everybody has an awareness. If you have an interest in the subject, you have an awareness. And it may not be part of you, but everybody has the ability to enhance and expand and develop that understanding of faith and trust in God. Because that means you have a relationship. When you trust somebody, it means you have a relationship. Now there's trusting of a child trusting. There's trusting of a friend. And there's trusting that a spouse can trust. And there's trusting of a business partner. And there's all levels of trust. And when you have that emunah, you have faith. You have faith in the trust and trust in the faith. Because there are two different terms really, and we're not going to talk about it tonight. Emunah, which is faith, and bitochen, trust. But once you start on the pathway of Emunah, you're opening up a new relationship. Not only with God, a new relationship with your soul, with your inner self, with the hidden part of you. We all know, anyone who has done any research in education, we're constantly doing research, the majority of the human brain is not used. The majority of the intellectual capacity, that means a computer is given a certain amount of megabytes, and even that you can't use all the megabytes most of the time. But when you reach that you've overextended the megabytes, you've got to get a better motherboard. What do you call it, right? You got to do something to the human being doesn't have that problem. He doesn't have to turn in his brain and his heart and his soul for a more upgraded, with a better capacity, because we don't use our capacity. Certain studies say that we only use our intellectual usage of the brain is between 4 and 6%. Otherwise, we're busy with other things. We have really a lot of other things to do, and that's part of life. That's the way God created us. But the question is, how can you really increase, enhance, be open? Be open to recognize that you have a brain. Be open to recognize you have a heart, an emotion. Be open to recognize that you have the capacity for faith and to develop this faith. So that is the answer that we'll say in a nutshell.
Yes.
This is a very interesting question. I wish all of you a good evening, and you should all have a happy Purim, and you should celebrate only Mishenichnas Oder Marbim B'Simcha. We should all have the blessing of God to have cause to celebrate occasions of joy and happiness for all of your life, family, and for a peaceful, tranquil living.
Amen.
Baruch Tiyeh. Bruchim Tiyeh.